before was all cut down by the settlers and turned into farms. Then after the Depression, when many of those farms were abandoned, forests started regrowing, and now Ohio is about 50% forested. So some of the forest has regenerated. But Ohio was not originally prairie. It was a forest. And it was cut down by us, well, not us, but people before us. So if you want to tell them don't do this, then the question is, who the heck are you to tell me what to do? And if you want to give them an option, what should be the option?
Money.
Well, you can try to conserve rainforests by providing alternative sources of income, and that has worked in some cases where a country is paying another country to say, okay, don't cut down the forest, we pay you to preserve the forest, and that is their atonement for their own pollution back in their countries. So they're doing this carbon trading. Yes, ma'am?
Oh my god.
Norway and Guyana are doing something along those lines. Yeah. Yes, sir. Can hear you. Interesting point, whether or not we could offer them alternative crops to grow where this corn has been used. I don't know whether you'd be very successful replacing the corn with something else in a cleared area. There are that might be possible if you had genetically engineered foods that were relying on lower nutrient levels, but I don't know of any cases like that. There has been some movement to try to promote native agriculture. So Native Americans used to use a complex agricultural system that intermixed trees and crops. So they had multi-layered agricultural lands. So if you read the books by Plotkin, he talks about visiting these Native American villages in the Guyana, I think it's Guyana, certainly Suriname, and how what looked like a jungle to him was actually a field crop rotation system that was being attended to by the Native Americans. And they had tall trees, and they had little shrubs, and they had smaller plants, all of which were grown for agricultural purposes in a complex system like this, which was much more sustainable than doing that. Yes, ma'am.
Can people do this in the form of a cycle, like slash and burn one area, then once they use that area, they move to another, they let the previous one kind of grow and then go back to it, like back and forth?
Very interesting question. Can you rotate between regions where you keep slashing and burning and then eventually go back? So it takes a long time for this to regenerate into that. So some Native American cultures in the tropical rainforest do use slash and burn agriculture to clear fields, and then they plant not a monoculture like corn, but a much more complex system like that, which is more sustainable for a longer period of time. Very interesting question. So they do rotate, but and they do use slash and burn, but just not the way that the white settlers have done. Yes, sir. If you're planting a complex system like that, you're not harvesting the entire crop every time. So from the trees, they're only harvesting the fruits. And then from the shrubs, they're only harvesting certain parts of the shrub, so the shrub continues to grow. So they maintain a system like that. So there are some crops that they grow, like manioc, that they do harvest completely, but most of this complex system is not harvested. Yes, sir?
Well, what was that system that like George Washington Carver or whatever came up with peanuts, where he cycled? It was kind of like along the same lines of what you're saying with Vito, right? He used to do, but he cycled his crops where he would have one quadrant was growing fresh peanuts, which would grow in very malnourished soil, and then you had other crops growing here.
That's a good question. The rotation question that you're asking, that is done in many parts of the world when you grow legumes in a plot, and then the next year you plot a grain. Because Legumes have these bacteria associated with the roots that help to extract nitrogen from the atmosphere and store it in a usable form, turn it into a usable form. And then when you harvest that legume and recycle part of it into the soil, that nitrogen is now added to the soil. Grains tend to require a lot of nitrogen fertilizer, so if you grew legumes this year and then you grow grains the next year, you don't have to provide as much fertilizer for the grain. So that type of rotation, so it's legume, grain, fallow, legume, grain, fallow, that is common. It is much more sustainable than this, but even that does require usually requires supplemental fertilizers, and you do have to worry about soil erosion, which is a different problem. So when the soil is not covered by a crop for a certain part of the year, then you lose some of the topsoil due to erosion. But multiple cropping systems have been advocated since at least the 80s. So some of you might have heard of shade-grown coffee?
No.
Any coffee drinkers in the room?
Any coffee
You're students, so many of you drink coffee. Have you paid attention to where your coffee comes from?
It comes from Poland.
Other than Starbucks.
My backyard.
So when you buy coffee, some of the coffees say fair trade, organically grown, etc. And some of them is just, what type of roast it is. And some of them specifically say shade grown. So you can cut down the trees and plant coffee bushes. Or you can actually keep the tall trees and plant coffee bushes in the shade of the tall trees. So the shade-grown coffee is done that way. Like you don't cut the trees to plant coffee. You grow them in the shade of the tall trees. So that's much more sustainable than cutting down everything and just planting coffee. But your harvest will be a little less because you're not using the whole land for coffee. Somebody's hand up. Yes, sir. In terms of taste? Oh, I have no idea. Taste is so subjective. I don't recall shade-grown coffee being necessarily less bitter. All right, we will that's the relevant, but I'm going to tell you something that is not relevant to here, but if you have heard of it, I'll be interested in your opinion. Have you heard of civet coffee?
Yeah, that's the pooping coffee.
Civet coffee? Civet is an animal that kind of looks like a cat. So they eat the coffee beans, it comes out the other end, then they harvest the coffee beans out of the feces. You can buy it in New York City. Dean and DeLuca, I don't want to promote Dean and DeLuca, but it's the only place in New York City that actually sells it, that I know of. It's ridiculously expensive. The cheapest version is the one that Dean and DeLuca sells, and it's $500 a pound.
I've seen some like
The expensive ones are
similar
$3,000 a pound, so you're not getting the expensive ones.
yeah, one of them
Anyway.
they like put coffee up
Yes,
the
sir.
house and like clean them out. Yeah.
The purpose of having civet coffee, the whole point is that the enzymes in the digestive tract of this animal, the civet, breaks down some of the bitter compounds of the coffee, so the coffee is supposed to be more smooth and much less bitter. For $500 a pound, you might just add a little sugar and cream to your regular coffee. However, if you have it, then you can have the bragging rights of saying you have had civet coffee. So I actually bought some for my students, not this class, there are too many of you, for my ethnobotany class because they were reading an article about it and we did a taste test, compare our regular coffee, which was $15 a pound, and the $500 a pound civet coffee. And some of them liked it more and some of them didn't. They all said it was less bitter. Yes, sir.
How is it prepared though?
With class.
You,
He just said he bought it for class.
French press. We made both of them using French press. And no cream and no sugar, we just wanted to see the difference between the two types of coffee, and they claimed, some of them claimed, well, most of them claimed that it was less bitter.
What's the point?
But for $500 a pound, I'm not so sure it's... You can have it once, so you can say you've had it.
Because when I went
If you're willing to have cat poop coffee, basically.
graduating, went to
Anyway, so back to this.
and I was all
Deforestation, certainly,
and I was like, good.
if it's slash and burn, is absolutely horrible because you're burning the trees on top of removing the photosynthetic organisms. What other reason might you have for deforestation?
He's like,
Yes.
it
Yes,
went
sir.
to the computer after, and then I will email it
Ways
to you.
of dealing with
And I was
this.
like,
What if overpopulation were the
she's like,
issue?
we can
Because we're always dealing on how to sustain living. So what if we dealt with
send it to me.
overpopulated populations and what would be?
So overpopulation means
You give him an address, he's like,
more what?
I'm never yeah, what?
More respiration, more of you, so you're respiring more.
But I'm not
But that could be at the expense of other organisms.
no one get.
So if you're killing the other animals in the area, you're removing other respiring organisms and replacing them with yourselves. So that may not necessarily mean more respiration per unit land, just because there are more humans, because there could have been more deer in the area and we killed the deer to replace them with humans. Yes, sir.
But at the same time, we're getting rid of the trees. So we're getting
All right, overpopulation could mean deforestation because you need more space for homes, you need more supplies to build homes, you need more roads. You go out to suburbia and you see all of the land that used to be forest that's cut down and it's now strip malls and roads and etc. For many reasons, it could be because there are more humans respiring, which may or may not be the reason because that means that you might have replaced other animals, so that may not necessarily lead to higher CO2 concentrations. But certainly overpopulation has led to deforestation, not just for agriculture. Deforestation could be for agriculture, could be for roads, could be for housing, could be for supplies. You need more wood to make furniture, more wood to build homes, more wood to do other stuff. So all of that could lead to increased CO2 concentrations. Yes, sir. Methane is a greenhouse gas, however, that doesn't affect CO2 concentration. So methane does affect global climate change, but does not affect CO2 concentration. Very good question. Where does the methane come from? So if you support the cattle industry, there are many reasons that you would be contributing to increased CO2 concentrations and global climate change. Yes, sir. So whether or not forest fires have increased because of change in the global climate. I'm not sure that's regular enough to account for the graph that you see. Because the graph is very steady. Somebody's hand up in the back. Yes, ma'am. All right, so the point of the greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane is that they absorb heat, and so they lead to what people used to call global warming, but now really should be referred to as global climate change, because what matters more is not the change in the average temperature, but what matters is more the extremes, and we're seeing a lot more extreme weather, both in the summers and in the winters. So they shield the atmosphere kind of like a greenhouse glass, traps heat, so sunlight comes in, but the heat is not radiating out in the glass house. That's why they're called greenhouse gases. So they absorb the heat and then they don't radiate it back to the outside of the atmosphere. So the atmosphere on the Earth as a whole is warming up, but that means that you get more extreme conditions, more serious storms in the summer, more serious storms in the winter, all the hurricanes we've had recently coming up to the Northeast, which all used to be 100-year events and now they happen every other year. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if this is a stretch, but I know that that's linked to like the melting of the ice.
Global climate change is related to the melting of the polar ice. That is true.
I had a question regarding the salinity of the ocean as it goes down, more fresh water is melting into the ocean. Does that somehow affect the CO2 level?
So The CO2 cycle in the ocean gets much more complicated because as CO2 concentration